Hello and welcome to our recap from round one of the 2024 Rugby Championship, and what a round it was if you are a fan of South African rugby or Argentinian rugby. Very much less so if you are an All Blacks or a Wallabies fan, and we will get to this as we go through this recap. Starting with match one at Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane. Now, this has been a hollow hunting ground for the Springboks, to say the least. Never really seemed to matter what sort of form the Boks arrived into Brisbane in, whether they were flying or terrible. They always had a difficult day there, except for one outing in 2013 when they thumped the Wallabies for their only win at the venue from 13 previous outings. Today, they would add to that win record, adding a second win and again another big win at the venue as they came away with a 33-7 win. Now, the story of the tape is the Boks were just completely overpowered the Wallabies in what was a very concerning signs for Joe Schmidt as he builds towards the rest of the championship. It was very much a case of almost men against boys. The Boks got over the gain line routinely. They met the Wallabies at the gain line defensively, and it was really a domination from the off. It would take 2 yellow cards for the Wallabies to finally get over the try line, and even at that, it wasn't that comprehensive. So, diving into the stats, we'll start off with what the main issues were for the Wallabies. It appeared like there was a very concerted effort to try and attack narrow from the Australians. And the logic behind that is that you want to try and get into the belly of the beast, i.e. right into the middle of the Boks rush defence, rather than trying to get wide early where you can get picked off for intercepts or turned over in the wider channels, which the Boks tend to feast on. Now, the only teams that really have had much success against South Africa in this department are Ireland, France and New Zealand over the past few years. And those are 3 teams that can oftentimes match South Africa physically. For the Wallabies, the issue was outside of Rob Valentini, who we'll get to a little bit more, they just did not have the ball carriers to match the Boks at the gain line. So what was happening is they were routinely getting hit at the gain line or just behind it and did not have the power to get through those tackles. This then meant they were on the back foot and had no chance of getting wide. And if they did try and get wide, that's where they got picked off again. So they were essentially looking to go into the belly of the beast. Didn't work, and they did not have a plan B, which was very surprising given Joe Schmidt's coaching record of being quite a multifaceted coach. In saying that, that was maybe something that was labelled at Ireland during the end of his tenure, where the Irish power game was found out and they were unable to sort of fulfil that. But up till that point, Schmidt was a very flexible coach, so it'll be interesting to see how he adapts the Wallabies over the next few weeks to sort of open up their game. Now, probably worth remembering, they won't be up against it quite as much physically as they will against the Argentinians or the All Blacks as they were against the Springboks. Now, they'll have to be better than they were physically, but they're more likely to be able to get away with not dominating the game line quite as much as they have to against a team like South Africa, who just smash you there with their big tacklers. So for the Wallabies, if you're to look at their standard performers, Carlo Tizzano topped the tackle charts with 19 tackles made, which is a great return from him. He was closely followed by Lukan Salakai-Loto, who had 18 tackles and 17 carries for 30 meters. So again, not a great return on the amount of carries, but he was busy. He was all over the place and he was getting on the ball. And he was a willing carrier and a willing defender, which is what you want to see in a team that's rebuilding. So plenty of positives there for him. In terms of the backline, substitute winger Dylan Preach he was probably the busiest of the backline players in terms of just the stats, where he came away with 33 meters from 8 carries, which again, not a great return for him, but outside of that, there wasn't that many standouts for the Wallabies going forward, save for their centres. The centres had a pretty decent outing in the first half and obviously kept fighting, but just weren't making that gain line and weren't really making the meters, which again has always been sort of a hallmark of Schmidt's sides, is having a big physical centres. When you think back to his time with Ireland, where you had the likes of Robbie Henshaw, and then when you go to the All Blacks, he has Geordie Barrett. So how he fixes that, Hunter Paisami seems to have that fit that bill. Obviously, he's not quite as big as either player, but he's a willing worker. So we'll see if he continues in that role and how he develops. But in terms of purely the eye test, so away from the numbers, Rob Valentini looked like the most dangerous of the Wallabies. The back row, He carried pretty well, made some yards through the Bok defenders. He was just about the only Wallaby who really did. Defensively, got around the park, put some big hits in, which was great to see. And at the breakdown, he was a menace. Now, he did get pinged a couple of times, but he was willing and he was going after the Boks at that point. So that was really great to see. He was probably quite closely followed by Harry Wilson at number 8, who had a decent outing. And again, as much of a decent outing as you can when your tight five are really getting dominated. So those are probably the most positive things for the Wallabies to take away from the match. Purely in terms of the stats, they won all 5 of their scrums, which is great. So 100% win rate on that. And they had 90% win rate at the line-out, which is no mean feat against the Springboks, a team that, dominated Ireland in July at line-out time. So those are positives for the Wallabies to take forward, but ultimately the slim pickings for Schmidt in terms of positives. On the other side of things, starting with the Springbok positives, because the negatives, there was very few of them, obviously, when you're that dominant. The most positive takeaway was obviously Sasha Feinberg and Ngomazulu at fly half. The kid has everything, and he really looks to be the present and the future of the position there. So while his stats don't necessarily jump off the page at you, the eye test certainly does. He had 3 carries to the game line for 34 meters with 1 line break, 1 offload, 1 try assist, and defensively he made 16 tackles, which is a monster shift, and they were big tackles. He very rarely got found wanting. Looking back to that line break, it was a real insight into what he brings to the team. The Wallabies went for a clearance kick and he returned it with gusto straight through 2 Wallabies would-be tacklers, found Villy LaRue with a brilliant ball, and the fullback couldn't quite get away, but it set up a Springbok try just down the line. So it was a hell of a play from Ngomazulu, and it'll be interesting to see how Rassie and the coaches manage it going forward, whether Andre Pollard will get a run or Mani Lebok. You could see if they were going to make changes. They're announcing their team tomorrow. We're recording this on Monday. They announced their team on a Tuesday, the Boks do. They could well go with Lebok at 10 and Pollard at 12, or Ngomazulu at 12 if they wanted to mix things up against the Wallabies, given how confident they probably will be that they can win in Perth, which is historically been a very good place for the Boks, and just where the Wallabies are at the moment, it's hard to see anything but a Springbok win there. So rumours coming out of the camp are that Rassie's going to mix it up, so that could be an interesting one. But it would be, you could not blame Rassie if he wanted to keep Sasha at 10 for the rest of the championship, and he'll almost certainly get a run against the All Blacks and Pumas there. It seems like it's his jersey to lose now. From the kicking tee, he was very good too. Before we move on, he kicked 4 from 5 with the one miss being from the left-hand touchline just off the right post. It was actually a good effort. It just slid off, so no concerns there, which is what gives him the nod over Lebok. And then obviously his attacking prowess ahead of Pollard is fantastic. Interestingly, the Bok attack coach Tony Brown did say he wants to get Andre Pollard back to being one of the toughest gain line carriers in the 10 channel, like he was historically in the early days of his career. So let's see if Andre can up his game, which would only be a good thing for Springbok rugby going forward. Away from Ngomazulu, Peter Steph-Totoy, we're almost getting not fed up of talking about this, but just so used to it. Absolutely dominant. He was a late shift from the back row to the second row, with Archeus Neyman pulling up injured, but he was equally dominant in the 5 jersey as he would have been in the 7 jersey. 21 carries, 48 meters, big return for a big man. And defensively, he was a monster again, topping the tackle charts. So that is highly unsurprising. We're almost, again, so used to saying that. So just to add a bit of variety, young number 8, Elric Lowe, had a big day with 15 carries. So he was the only player. He was just behind Peter Steph-Totoy on that chart. So that was a big return for the Bulls man, who really looks at home in that number 8 jersey, with Jasper Visse unavailable earlier in the season, and Evan Ruas out for the next while, rumoured to be 6 months with a shoulder injury. It really looks like now is the time for Elric Lowe to stamp his authority on that number 8 jersey. Obviously, he brings a lot of versatility, and he's a really good line-out jumper, so looks like a really good option in that number 8 jersey, and he's learning from the best in Dwayne Vermeulen. So let's see how he continues to develop. Shifting to the back line, Curtly Arnsah, just a superstar. Nothing else to say on that. 107 meters made from 12 carries, 3 line breaks, 5 defenders beaten, and 2 tries scored, with 1 try just being a moment of magic that very few players in the world could pull off outside of possibly his wing partner Cheslin Colby and maybe Anton Dupont. It was just magic feet left, gosh knows, 10, 12 Wallabies defenders, it felt like, in his wake as he just scooted through for a brilliant try. So the winger is on fire at the moment, and here's an early bet if you can make a bet on it for World Player of the Year. Aaron says a real shout, as are a number of other Springbok players. So let's see how he goes on that front. The biggest takeaway, if you were to have a little bit of a knock on the Springboks, 3 yellow cards towards the end of the contest was completely unnecessary, and something Rassie will no doubt be pulling his hair out about. Obviously, when you're 33-7 up, you can get away with these sort of things, but to drop down 3 players was just ridiculous in the final 10 minutes, and not something the Boks will want to make a habit of. So there is that. In terms of the set piece, it could have been a lot more dominant, but it was hard to tell whether the new scrum laws had maybe affected the Boks more so than any other team. With just a 75% win rate, possibly being due to scrums not being reset and free kicks being offered. So that's something to track for South Africa and see how they shift into being able to incorporate a bit more scrums. There was a funny moment where Peter Steph Toy asked the referee Luke Pearce whether he could take a scrum when Pearce offered him a penalty on two sides of things. So on two sides of the pitch. So very interesting to see. It's obviously something the Boks are looking to highlight. And line-out time, very good. 88% win rate. And again, for the Wallabies, if we're to look on the positives for them, obviously 90% win rate and line-out time against a very good line-out team is a huge return for them. And 100% win rate from their 5 scrums for the Wallabies. It was a great return in terms of the positives, as we said. But overall, a complete domination for the Boks as they sort of end that Brisbane hoodoo and really now look like the team to beat in the Rugby Championship. Not that they weren't before, but with the All Blacks losing at home to Los Pumas, if the Boks can get another win and preferably a bonus point win, they could well end up with 4 from 4 with the All Blacks coming to South Africa for 2 tests before travelling to Argentina, which actually now looks like the toughest part of the championship for them. Again, famous last words, never write off the All Blacks, but the Boks are a class ahead of them. Shifting over to that fixture between Argentina and New Zealand, it was, for those who don't necessarily follow the Rugby Championship that intently, would have been a major shock to see Argentina win down in New Zealand, but they have done it in recent years, and they've also beaten the All Blacks in Australia during the COVID-affected Rugby Championship. So they now kind of have got rid of that hoodoo, as have Ireland, obviously, with New Zealand. New Zealand had that sort of long run over Argentina and Ireland. So interesting to see that shifting. The biggest takeaways for the All Blacks, there was a few. Their kick chase defense was just appalling, and the Argentinians absolutely shredded them on that. There seemed to be a real disconnect, in particular in the centres, between Anton Leonard-Brown and Jordy Barrett, with the two of them kind of coming out of the line at different occasions on different occasions, which really left open a lot of space. And Argentina capitalised. Argentina simply were full value for their win. They were more physical around the fringes of the ruck, with Pablo Matera being an absolute monster, and Marcus Kramer smashing the All Blacks. So it was really interesting to see. In terms of the All Blacks, they had their moments. Their try with Damien McKenzie and Beauden Barrett setting up Sam Darry was a huge sort of insight into what All Black rugby can be when they get clicking. Now, there was obviously a bit of a chat that there was a forward pass in there, and the Argentinians were really sort of remonstrating about that, but obviously didn't get the rub of the green on that. But Argentina were just full value and really, really dominant when it came to the physical stakes on that side of things. When you just read through the stats of it, it was a really interesting case on where the All Blacks currently are and where they have been. Obviously, when you look back at it, both sides had pretty good post-contact meters, with the All Blacks having 230 meters post-contact, and the Pumas taking that at 253 meters post-contact, which was really interesting when you look at the fact that they only had 102 carries. So again, that really leads into what we're saying from counter-attack. The All Blacks were kicking deep, the Pumas were running it back, the All Blacks were missing tackles, and the Pumas were shredding them, which was really interesting. The All Blacks made most of the play with 194 passes, so they were slinging it around, but weren't all that effective at capitalising. Now, we say that, again, they did score 30 points, but to concede 38 points at home is just not All Black rugby. So that'll be a lot of work for Scott Robertson as we head into next week. Both sides will obviously be meeting at Eden Park. So in terms of the defense, both sides had pretty good tackle completion rates, with Argentina having 88% win rate, a tackle completion rate rather, sorry, on that one, and New Zealand at 89%, which is a good return for both sides on that side of things. But it was crucial tackles, as we said, that the All Blacks missed, in particular on that counter attack, where they just really, really struggled on that side of things. So there's a lot to work on for both sides going into next week, which is concerning for the All Blacks, because again, the Pumas were brilliant. They were like a well-oiled machine, but it doesn't feel like their peak. Stealing the show for them, which was really interesting, was Santiago Carreras at fly half, who Gloucester, his Premiership club, tend to play him at fullback, and you can see why, because he's a wide-ranging runner. But what he has brought to the Argentinian attack is a willingness to attack the gain line. He topped their carries with 16 carries, and he also had a nice line break, which was really, really interesting on that. In terms of his meters carried, he topped that too with 62 meters. So he was really pulling the strings, but it was probably a little bit, to assess him as merely a running fly half, was probably a little bit lazy. His kicking game was on point and pinned the All Blacks back when needed, as was his passing game. So I think they've really unearthed a gem there at 10 going forward, and someone who can really take charge of the team for Felipe Contepomi and pull it in a similar sort of strings to Contepomi in his playing day, which was brilliant to see. From the tee, he was exceptional. He landed 4 penalty goals and 3 conversions, which went obviously a long way to downing the All Blacks. That's Carrera. So Argentina looked like a really well-rounded team for the rest of the championship. For the All Blacks going forwards, the biggest fixes will be obviously that kick chase defense. First up, tackles. In terms of, as we said, the tackle completion rate was pretty good, but it's those crucial tackles that they missed. And again, a lot of that looked more like positioning rather than one-on-one tackles. The big debate this week will be for the fly half position, whether Damien McKenzie continues there. He hasn't looked like the man that can kind of guide the All Blacks forward, going back to the England series, where, you know, a lot of All Blacks fans maybe feel they were possibly lucky to beat England both times, if they're being honest. And Argentina exposed what England couldn't, and really shredded the All Blacks in most departments. It was an interesting one in that it took 60 minutes to get the first scrum, and when the scrums did come around, the All Blacks struggled, with Fletcher Newell in particular really struggling and getting outsmarted, which is an interesting insight, because the All Blacks have been lauded over the last 12 months for their intelligence around the scrum, given that they've possibly lacked power that they previously had. So the fact that they got found out there and really dominated in that department is a worrying sign for them ahead of next week, because it doesn't feel like a quick fix. The fact that they departed with a 0% win rate at scrum time, whereas the Argentinians had a 100% win rate, is a big focus point for them this week. But that is our very brief recap of the Rugby Championship. So the scores again, for confirmation: South Africa came away with a 33-7 bonus point win, while Argentina came away with a 38-30 win to set up a great start to their championship. All of the action is obviously live and exclusive on FloRugby for North American viewers. So please follow and subscribe for more epic rugby content. We also have the upcoming URC competition. We have the Champions Cup, the Challenge Cup, Super Rugby, and the Top 14. So we have all of your rugby needs. So follow along and subscribe to get all of this live rugby action. Thank you for checking in. Please feel free to leave a comment below and give us a like and share if you wouldn't mind. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the rugby.